Hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Are we throwing Idaho taxpayer dollars into the wind? I know that's a pretty loaded question, and it could actually apply in a couple of different areas. Two specifically, though, that come to mind. We're going to first take a look at the voter turnout for these off-year elections, like the one that just took place on Tuesday of this week. It's dismal. I'll tell you more about it coming up, but there's a big question about, is this a waste of taxpayer time and money, plus seeding the clouds, something that water experts in Idaho are looking at very closely, but is it giving taxpayers the bang for the buck that they deserve? I've got details coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. You know, the taxpayers, there's no shortage of people lined up with a handout waiting for their dollars. And of course, the legislature is right there to make sure that whatever tax dollars are taken in are properly allocated and spent and so forth. But are the taxpayers really getting what they need to get for their hard-earned money, or are legislators and other officials in Idaho throwing taxpayer dollars into the wind? Let's start with elections, and I'm going to start with a headline or two. We'll start with KTVB's headline. Well, these May elections always are lower turnout. Well, Idaho saw lower turnout for sure. This is the story from KTVB, and I get it. It was an off-year election, but listen to Secretary of State Phil McGrain. He says these May elections are always a little bit lower voter turnout. A lot of people weren't necessarily sure what they were voting on. Okay, so that's part of it. You didn't see a lot of campaigning for hyper-local elections like highway districts or library districts or sewer districts or water districts. Probably what drew the most attention were bonds and levies, and a lot of people just don't really want to pony up money. Some people are eager to pony up other people's money, but again, you didn't see the kind of political advertising, you didn't see the sustained campaigning, and so turnout was relatively slow, to put it mildly. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of this. Ryan Spoon over here on the left-hand side of the screen. This is from Ada County. Okay, May 25, out of 269,923 registered voters, 21,000 showed up. So your voter turnout was about 8% in Ada County. Canyon County, which is what you see on the right-hand side of the screen, with over 113,000 voters, only had 11,000 show up, about 10% roughly. Now, Canyon County, of course, this was, I believe, where Senator Tammy Nichols resides. And she was saying, look, this was the voter turnout for Canyon County last night. And many other areas had similar, if not lower. But listen to what she says here. This is typical for off-year elections, as is proven over and over again with low voter turnout. So the question is, should we do away with off-year elections and consolidate them? And she actually solicits that input from people who might want to see about doing that. I don't know about you. It seems like an idea whose time has come. Theo Wald says conducting county and municipal Idaho elections in off years ensures dramatically low turnout. In some places, only 10% of registered voters turn out for these elections, compared to up to 85% in federal election cycles. I mean, I was working the polls last year, and boy, come election day, it was a busy day start to finish. But Theo Wald says, look, Idaho can and should consolidate its elections. In fact, he says, I wrote a bill that accomplishes this. The only people who benefit from the current election are Democrats and establishment Republicans who use low turnout elections to push through tax increases, new bonds, and other spending. That seems like a pretty accurate assessment right there. And this is, well, why does government grow even in the off years? Well, it's because people don't feel like they need to show up. It's like they don't need to participate with quite the intensity of the most important election of our lifetime. So you can take that one of two ways. Either, look, none of these elections matter, or every election is the most important election of our lifetime. But the idea is it does cost money, and it takes time, and it takes effort to pull off these off-year elections. So maybe the question of consolidating them really is something worth looking at, especially when it comes to saving Idaho taxpayers money. Now, there's another issue regarding taxpayer money, and this is one I just want to spend a few minutes on because we probably don't think much about this, but Idaho is considering cloud seeding. And so the Gang of Eight, and this is Christy Zito who wrote this piece from her Substack, they're wondering, Is Idaho chasing storms or are they just chasing spending? Unproven science, no permits, millions of taxpayer dollars. This is what Idahoans aren't being told about cloud seeding. A message from the Gang of Eight. So here's what Christy Zito has to say. She says Idaho's water is one of our most valuable and tightly managed resources. From an irrigation and hydropower to fish habitat or drinking water, we depend on a predictable supply. And that's why so many people are looking to cloud seeding as a way to boost precipitation. But before we spend millions of dollars, public dollars that is, each year on this experimental approach, she says we need to stop and ask the hard questions. First of all, does cloud seeding actually work? Then who's tracking the results? And why is no one talking about the GAO study, that's the General Accounting Office, federal General Accounting Office study that raised major red flags? So let's break this down very quickly. We'll go through a couple of things. She talks a little bit about what cloud seeding is. The graphic here kind of helps to show, the goal of winter orographic cloud seeding to increase snowpack and subsequent stream flow. And this describes, the process of silver iodide and how it's used, how it's released into the atmosphere and, creates little nuclei for ice crystals, which hopefully turns into snow or maybe into rain. Anyway, it's something that's been going on for a long time, but it doesn't come free. All right. And there's another type too that Christy talks about here, and that is liquid propane being used in cloud seeding. And this is the explanation given here. Idaho's actually started using these liquid propane generators, which are placed on high mountain ridges. And these release propane gas into the air. I think Greta Thunberg just clutched her chest and went, how dare you? But it rapidly expands and it cools, triggering snowfall and storms that would be too warm for silver iodide to be effective. Now, Christy says these methods are designed to stimulate precipitation, but what happens when these substances are released repeatedly into the atmosphere and snowfall year after year? See, that's the question few agencies are actually asking. And the long-term environmental and health impacts of these chemicals remain largely unstudied. But it's the spending more than anything that really deserves to be questioned. She says the Idaho Water Resource Board currently spends about $4 million per year on cloud seeding across the state. Now that seems like chump change, but remember, some taxpayer or several taxpayers had to work and produce in order to earn money, which was then taxed away from them by the state to be spent on this. So it's not like, we just came up with the money from it came from somebody who actually put in the effort. And these operations span the Boise, Wood, Payette, and Upper Snake River basins. But despite the public investment, there's still no requirement for permits. There's no independent evaluation. And the Idaho Water Resource Board carries no liability if the program fails or causes unintended consequences. Yeah. So, it didn't work out. That's too bad. That's not going to cut it for somebody who, again, has their hard-earned tax money being spent on it or maybe suffers some kind of an injury. So that should raise some eyebrows. So from here, Christy asks, she points out, we're not opposed to innovation, but the idea of blind spending, that's something that needs to be questioned. Idaho needs water. We understand the critical role that snowpack plays in sustaining our economy, agriculture, and ecosystems. However, spending millions of dollars on a program with no proven effectiveness, no liability, no permitting, no long-term study of its impacts, well, she says that should be a concern to everyone, regardless of political party or their position on climate policy. So here's what the U.S. GAO found. The United States Government Accountability Office released a comprehensive report, this was in December of last year, titled Cloud Seeding Technology, Assessing Effectiveness and Other Challenges. This is the most detailed national review of cloud seeding in decades. And the report doesn't claim that cloud seeding never works, but it does raise some very interesting red flags about the lack of reliable data, inconsistent evaluation methods, and widespread reporting practices that make effectiveness difficult to prove. This is a quote from the actual GAO report. Reliable information is lacking on the conduct of optimal, effective cloud seeding and its benefits and effects. Now, even Idaho's own studies have come up short. Idaho is cited as a leader in cloud seeding, but its most carefully studied project failed to deliver convincing results. Now, she's talking about the 2017 Snowy project. That was a federally funded multi-agency field experiment, which was conducted right here in Idaho, designed to evaluate seeding effectiveness using advanced radar, aircraft, and atmospheric modeling. Now, it was hailed as a breakthrough, but here's what it actually found, and this is worth noting. Only 3 out of 27 seeding attempts showed a clearly observed effect. That means cloud seeding had no detectable impact on precipitation in nearly 9 out of 10 cases. So now you probably are thinking, okay, maybe that's not the best use of my tax money. But there are the questions that need to be asked. And this is what Christy Zito says those questions include. And coming from a legislator, actually coming from the Gang of Eight, maybe this is one that you would want to consider thinking about and maybe answering. Should Idaho continue funding cloud seeding without independent verification or long-term study? For this matter, should the public have more say in evaluating programs that affect our water, land, and skies? And finally, she asks, what solutions would you like to see? Would you want more oversight, better data, a pause, or something else entirely? So yeah, we need the water. And cloud seeding may actually have some promise. It doesn't appear to be, this isn't out there with the, witching for water and using the little divining rods and whatnot. There's some scientific basis here, but it clearly doesn't seem to deliver the bang for the buck that some people believe it should. So as a taxpayer, does that concern you? Would you like to see your dollars used wisely, whether it's for off-year elections or whether it's for seeding the clouds for life-saving water? Be glad that you have legislators and organizations that are looking out after every tax dollar that the state allocates and spends and making sure that it's not being wasted. And sometimes that involves asking a few hard questions. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.